Back with you, Gallo Radio Show, SuperTalk Mississippi, streaming at supertalk.fm and SuperTalk TV. Glad to be with you this morning and happy to be joined now. First guest of the day, Senator Briggs Hopson joins us. He represents District 23. He is chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Good morning, Mr. Senator. I apologize for us being in the way of a duck hunt this morning.
I guess Lance told you I had an invite to be out in the woods this morning, but certainly glad to be with you guys today. And I guess before we get started, Richard, my condolences to the Gallo family and everybody at SuperTalk. I had fond and have fond memories of Paul and many interviews that I did with him, and certainly his good work for many years at the radio station. So condolences to all there at the station and to his family for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. It's been incredible to hear so many people who have had so many kind things to say, and it's the interesting thing about the relationships that existed with Paul is they weren't always in lockstep agreement on issues, and some of his guests and friends didn't necessarily agree with him on everything, and he certainly didn't agree with them, and yet those turned into fruitful and respectful relationships along the way.
Yeah, and Paul I had some tough interviews with Paul, for sure. I mean, he asked some tough questions, some probing questions, and I think I hope there was a mutual respect. I know there was respect on my part towards him because he had a job to do and asked some very tough questions and sometimes highlight distinctions between myself or folks that agree with me and others that could be across the aisle or across the chamber or across the building. And he did a good job of really digging into those issues and making sure that we were accountable to the people and let folks know how we stood on certain issues. And I hope that he had a respect for my ability to be able to articulate things that were important in my view personally, but also in the view of the party or view of the Senate and different hats that I was wearing. So really tough loss for our state, tough loss for a lot of people. But, he was able to get a lot of news out about what happened in Jackson that otherwise people would not have heard around the state.
Yeah. It feels to me like within the legislative cycle, as it comes to public information, there kind of ebbs and flows, and some weeks are quieter than others. You have, last week where everything's getting going, and you got all the bills that are being submitted. What's going on this week? I mean, it starts with a holiday, but there's also a deadline with MLK Day, but then also the bill deadline. Is it heavy on committee meetings right now? Is that where we are for this next week or two before the debate really gets heavy on the floor?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. This still is a little bit of a quiet week, and it's for two or three reasons. One is, of course, we've got a weather condition down on the coast in the south part of the state where we have some of our members that have not been able to get up to the Capitol. So I think that has slowed some things down a bit. And second is we just had our bill filing deadline Monday, so a lot of bills are just getting filed, and they haven't been assigned to committees yet. So if you're a committee chair, you don't even know what bills are in your committee. And I think it's prudent for any chair to take a look at all the bills in the committee before they start taking up bills. They may have one or two that they're focused on that they know they've got to take up, but sometimes you find as a committee chair that there are similar bills or companion bills that may be filed, and once you've read through the bills, you decide that you're going to take a bill that has not even yet been assigned to the committee. So I think there's that. And then the third thing that you have is, for me particularly, is we're still in the subcommittee process. Every year, I don't know if folks know this, but every year, every agency, department in the state of Mississippi has a hearing with the subcommittees and appropriations. So we have a bunch of those going on. And yesterday we had everything from Department of Revenue to the Workers' Compensation Commission. We had Real Estate Appraisers Board, Real Estate Commission, two or three others. So we had a full slate, and we were having every agency come before the state to explain what their budget needs are and what they think they can do to change their agency to make it more effective for the citizens that they serve.
In terms of your committee specifically, the Appropriations Committee, which people know, I mean, that's the purse strings. There's a lot that goes into that. Is there any significant legislation that you expect to come out of appropriations?
Well, the primary thing, I say this all the time, the primary thing that I do and that is my focus is to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. So
right.
Nothing specific, but very generally I would state I look at every agency to make sure they're being effective and efficient. And have to ask the tough questions. I met with one of the agencies in my office yesterday, not a public hearing, but met with them about some of their budget requests and possibly a deficit that may exist in their agency. And I asked some tough questions, and they know that I'm going to do that, and I'm sure my counterparts in the House do the same thing. Is to say, why do you think you need this, or what are you doing with the money that we gave you last year to take care of this issue? So, to me, it's about probing into those agencies to ensure that they are doing the best they can, because we have the duty to our taxpayers to make sure that they're not just spending money, without being frugal and responsible.
Yeah. Visiting with Senator Briggs Hopson. He represents District 23, Issaquah, Warren, Yazoo, parts of those counties, the greater Vicksburg area and beyond. Senator,
and Richard, Madison County too. I picked up in the last redistricting census a couple of precincts in Madison County, so honored to be representing the folks in Madison County as well. And by the way, good to be with you for the first time. I've admired your work, especially in the sports arena for many years. So excellent work that you've done, and always delighted to hear you on a radio call.
I appreciate that very much. Very kind of you to say that. I guess softball's out of the way, or general stuff out of the way. House Bill 1 is the bill that everybody's talking about, the House with kind of a comprehensive tax reform bill. And the question that I've got, and I think that has been asked the most, is there a Senate bill? And I've talked to some of your colleagues and some of the people that are around the Senate, and I've gotten mixed answers. Yes, there's a bill. Oh, we're working on a bill. Well, there are a lot of ideas. How are they going to coalesce and come out? So where is it at this point on the Senate side as you and your colleagues examine House Bill 1, work on your own bill? Where are we?
Yeah, great question. Yes, there will be a Senate bill. Let me answer that definitively.
Okay.
We have been working on a tax policy bill since last year, and the House came out of the chute early with their proposal. We had some individual meetings, Senator Harkins and the Lieutenant Governor and myself early, but we also have had meetings with several other senators as it relates to a fiscal policy study committee, and then many ideas came from that. And we look at this as putting every tax on the table and every spending issue on the table, too, because we can't just talk about tax policy without talking about some of the significant concerns in the state, one of which is PERS. Two would be a sustainable infrastructure models, some way to sustain our buildings of roads and bridges and other infrastructure. And a couple other things that we know from Medicaid. Richard, Medicaid, unfortunately, I don't know if a lot of people realize this, regardless of whether or not you do anything on any kind of, I'm going to say Medicaid expansion, but that term can be misinterpreted. But regardless of whether you do anything on that, our Medicaid ask is to be significantly higher this year, and we expect, unfortunately, that it's going to be significantly higher for many years to come. So we put all that on the table, not just tax, but other issues that we need to be looking at to be forward-thinking in our analysis and putting together a bill. So
let me interrupt just for a second. I mean, part of the Medicaid discussion is waiting to see what the new administration in Washington, D.C. is going to do in terms of funding and whether or not there are going to be major changes there, right?
No doubt. And that's my position on that is, while we had proposals from both chambers last year, I think now, for the most part, I think everybody's in a little bit of a wait and see because what happens at the federal level is certainly going to have a major impact on what we do at the state level. And I think other states go the same way. I was at a conference this past weekend out in Utah. I quickly flew out to a tax conference there and another meeting.
Riveting way to spend a weekend.
Yeah, I know. And then a hotel the whole time, so it was not much fun. You think going to Utah, you might have a chance to ski, but it was just all meetings. But anyway, in addition to talking about some major tax issues that are going on amongst the states and around the country, I think there was consensus amongst those with whom I've discussed that everybody's in a wait-and-see posture with Medicaid.
Makes sense. All right, so I interrupted your train of thought on the tax bill and a lot of different layers. I think I'll just jump to the crux of it, and if you've got time to hang on for one more segment, we'll try to wrap this conversation up on the other side. Sure. I'm going to be careful the words I use here, because I don't know that there is a personal dislike, but is the perceived political rivalry between the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House, is that going to get in the way of ultimately getting a major tax deal done that both sides can agree on?
Well, I'm not going to comment on perceived. Maybe there is some perceived rivalry, but I don't want to get into that. But I think both of those gentlemen are fine people, and they're not going to let any, if there were any personal competition or animosity, whatever you may want to call it, if there were that out there, they're both outstanding people, and they're going to do and try to do what is best for the state of Mississippi and its citizens. So I don't think anybody's going to use the old proverbial term, cut off their nose to spite their face and pass a bill or try to do something to one-up somebody when it's going to hurt the state. So, no,
that's good news. More with Briggs Hopson on the other side of this break. Wrapping up the 7 o'clock hour of the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Continuing our conversation with Senator Briggs Hopson. He represents District 23 and is chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator, we do appreciate your time this morning. So, as it pertains to the House bill that has been proposed and the Senate bill, by the way, when do you think we'll see this tax reform bill from the Senate?
I don't want to commit to a specific time, but I would think in week or two. We have a little bit longer deadline for finance and appropriations bills, and this is a finance bill, so it'll be coming out of Senator Harkin's committee. But our deadline is later for those bills. So, just want to make sure, and that's part of what we've discussed, is we want to make sure we've got the best possible bill, run pro formas on the proposal, have economic studies on it. We don't want to just throw something out there because it's politically popular or expedient. We want it to be sound and responsible, and also to give Mississippi the best bang for its buck. Look, you can hear everything, Richard, on all these taxes. It's funny, out at that conference in Utah, my colleagues around the country were talking about, I think the number one issue in other states is their concern for property tax increases. That's the one that I heard the most, people in different states that have property tax concerns. A couple of us talked about the income tax issue and lowering that. I think Arkansas was one of my colleagues there. Also had a colleague from Kansas who was saying, well, be careful, don't do what we did. But I know that's been the lesson about being
right, about wiping it all out at once.
Yeah, well, right. And so we're talking about all these other taxes. I mean, a couple of states were talking about a data tax. And I was like, goodness gracious, I can't imagine trying to do something about that. But having said that, when you look at when you pull a lever, whether it's sales tax, income tax, grocery tax, gas tax, property tax, not that we're dealing with property tax at the state level, but when you pull any of those levers, it's going to have some effect on the other. And I know there are no certainties on that. You can't get paralyzed in the analysis, but you also have to be, I think, responsible and say, look, we've run a bunch of models on this and done what I'm going to call a pro forma in the private sector. And here's what we think will happen, and here's why this is good for Mississippi. So, we're just trying to do the best we can and as much due diligence before we put something out that we think will be really good for Mississippi.
All right, so when you talk about all of those things that have got to happen, due diligence and pro forma and conversations with others, it's a relatively short legislative session. I mean, it's a 3-month session, and I know it feels like that 4-month session we had last year lasts forever. It feels like the 3-month session goes by in the blink of an eye. Do we get to the point where there is legislation in place this year that eliminates the income tax in Mississippi? Over time, phased out, but actually into law, it's going away, and this is how we're going to get there.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, you talk to colleagues, I think certainly I feel like there's consensus on lowering the income tax if it can be done. And I say consensus. I know there's some people that don't want to do that even. But, I think just doing a rough, straw poll on it, I think there's some consensus on that. I think the problem you have is to get there, you've got to raise other taxes. And by the way, we have a redistricting going on right now. So we've got several of our senators that are going to be up for election this year, and the House does too. So, Richard, do the math on that one. If you're running for election this year, not that it should change things, but the reality is a lot of those senators and House members will look at it and think, well, people are going to paint me as if I'm raising this tax or raising that tax to offset an income tax. You're going to have to explain that, and that's certainly what a good elected official would do, but that complicates matters as well. It really does, because I've talked to enough of my colleagues in the Senate. I've talked to a bunch about it, and you say, what if we pull this trigger, but it's going to require raising that trigger? Then no, I don't want to do that. I do not want to do that. So, then you start figuring, are there enough votes to get that done? But I think something can be done. It's just a matter of getting to that final thing where you can explain all the steps, you can explain what the cut's going to be, and then you can show that it's going to have a long-term good impact on the state of Mississippi's economy.
Last thing for you, Senator. Do you agree with the idea that this has to be a comprehensive bill and kind of addresses everything within the tax code / revenue model / PERS, that's all got to be part of one bill? Or does this need to be something that is handled in multiple bills to address the issues? Or do you get into trouble if you do it that way?
That's an outstanding question. It really is, and it's a tough question. I say it's a tough question to answer only because of this. If you want to pull one of those levers, it could have such an impact. I'm assuming, first of all, the lever that you would pull to do something is going to lower the tax and not increase taxes. But if you just did a tax reduction on something, it depends on how much of a reduction it is, and could that stand alone? Other people think that you ought to be able to go ahead. If you're going to make a transformative change, that you're going to have to push some levers that go up, which is going to require tax increases to make a transformative change. And
we got 20 seconds left. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Just to say, if you're going to make transformative changes, I know that's been the term that's been used. It's going to require some taxes to go up. No question about it. And that's where things get a little bit difficult. Now, I think you could step some things down, and people would be able to do it, and it wouldn't be as difficult to get across the finish line.
Senator Briggs Hopson, thanks so much for your time. I feel like there's a lot more in this conversation, and hopefully we can continue it soon.
Yeah, great being with you, Richard. First time to interview with you, but I'm glad to do it. Sorry to be doing it after the news about the passing of Paul Gallo, but great to be with you, and always good to be with Lance, too. So y'all have a great day. We'll be talking some more, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Gallo Radio Show, SuperTalk, Mississippi.